Hey, how's it going? Keith Townsend from the CTO Advisor. You know what? I'm having a ball of a time planning the CTO Advisor virtual conference, but let's be real. I've never attended a virtual conference. I just can't stand the experience. Not because the content is bad, but because people try to mimic an in-person conference too much, and it's just simply not an in-person conference. It's not a webinar. It's not an in-person conference, so why treat it as such? The other piece is the amount of information that a virtual conference wants is intrusive versus the value of the experience and the content. Every time I go to register for a virtual conference that I see a speaker that I'm loving, I'm like, oh, that's Sarah. I love to hear Sarah speak. But when I go to register, they want to know, what products have I bought in the past year? What products am I looking to buy in the next 2 years? The number of employees that I have, my birthday, my social security number, blah, 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 blah. They want to know as much marketing information as Facebook or Google, and that's just too much information. So for my virtual event, I've had to strike a balance between what I, as a attendee, am willing to give over and what my sponsors want as lead gen opportunities as far as information. So that's been an interesting experience. Some raw, inside baseball stuff. If it was just me, I'd want email and name for the registration. Marketers want at least phone number, city, and state. That's the bare minimum that they'll take. So that's the bare minimum that I ask for, because this isn't a fair exchange. In exchange for me paying for the platform to host a virtual event, honorariums for speakers, advertising, all the overhead, my sponsors are helping me cover that. In exchange for that, it's fair to ask for some information from some attendee informations that opt into going to a sponsor's booth, etc. So lesson one, I've learned how to strike a balance between the amount of information that sponsors want versus the amount of information that my attendees are willing to give, versus just the friction of that experience and the value that the attendees receive and my sponsors receive. Second thing, which has been a really interesting debate between my sponsors, presenters, and audience. Should we pre-record content versus should the content be live? I don't know if you've ever attended a webinar or virtual event in general. It doesn't matter if the presentation is live or not. I create a lot of content. A lot of it is video content. And I can tell you without a doubt, I'm doing this live now, but you don't care. Most people who interact with this content will see it after the fact. I think for example, on Twitter, I might get 20, 30 people that watch this video live, real time. It's great to be able to switch over to my Twitter stream and see people comment, etc. But I'll get maybe 200, 300 views otherwise, and that's not live. Virtual events are no different. Virtual events, you'll get a subset of the attendees who attend live, who want that in-person shoulder-to-shoulder experience with their fellow attendees, where they can go into a session and hear Keith talk about the CTO Advisor data framework, and they can make real-time comments to me or to other attendees about the framework. They can debate it real time. That's the value of attending a virtual event real time, is that you get to ask the presenter questions as they're in the chat room. Hopefully they're in the chat room, in real time, they get to answer the questions. They get to get additional audience insights. They can't change the presentation real time, but you know what? Neither could you do this in an in-person event. If I have a set of slides and I have not designed the session to be audience interaction thing, the real value is that I'm getting the energy from the audience. If I see audience members' eyes start to glaze over as I'm talking about a topic, I can either hurry that portion of the presentation up, I can change my approach a little bit. That helps. Again, you lose that live feeling, whether you've pre-recorded it or if you're given the presentation live. You can't read the audience. So for me, there's no value in giving a presentation live versus pre-recording it. I hit it on what the value is. The value is that you can interact with the presenter real time otherwise. So this kind of third lens, it happens during my worship services on Sunday that I've been hosting. The minister gets up, he preaches the lesson virtually, which is a pre-recorded message, and he's in the audience, he's in the chat room, and he can ask questions, he can comment, or he can answer questions, or he can respond to the chat room as people are experiencing the session live. That's the advantage of attending a real-time virtual event, is to interact. It's not a webinar. I can interact with the rest of the audience as we have this shared experience, similar to how we do on Twitter. And when you're not at an event and you're live and I'm live tweeting the event, you can interact with me as I'm watching Pat Gelsinger at VMworld give a session. I can't give Pat real-time reaction or feedback to something that he said. One of my analysts, I'm not going to exactly get up and clap. And the other thing is, I'm one of just thousands of people he's presenting to. But the value of you following my Twitter stream is that you can interact with me, an attendee, remotely, which gets me into, I think, one of the real values of a virtual event is that you can have a virtual event and the virtual event have a live element to it and a more asymmetrical interaction after the event is over. The great thing about a virtual event is that the content is recorded instantly. Whether you're giving it live or you've provided pre-recorded content, the platform typically remains active for the next, in my case, for the next 30 days. So the next day after the conference is over, you can go back and you can consume the rest of the content that you didn't consume live. There's no waiting a week, 2 weeks for the videos to become available on YouTube or via the conference portal. The videos are available right after the end of the recorded session. So the question is, how do you take advantage as a conference organizer? How do I take advantage of that capability? One of the things that I'm thinking about doing is, how do I enable community, because we're still about community here at the CTO Advisor, how do I enable community after the live event? What happens if I say, you know what, I really wanted to see Joe Onisek's modality, Joe, I don't even know how to pronounce that word, modality conference session. What if I live tweeted that the next day or the day after and said, hey, everybody, join me as I watch Joe's session over on the platform, and I live tweeted the experience. Corey Quinn has done this with previous recorded conference sessions where he's gone in and live tweeted his experience watching a session for the first time. Again, we're combining the asymmetric experience of a virtual conference and the live experience of Twitter. And again, this is all the value of combining social media and the virtual conference platform. Is an asymmetric experience. So even if you're not following my live tweet stream, you can still be part of the conversation after the fact. For a month after a conference is over, I still get interactive conversations about something I tweeted a month ago real time, because not everybody is on Twitter all the time following me. As they go back, look at my time feed, and like, whoa, Keith said vSphere 7 was the bee's knees? He is crazy. And I did not say that. And we can engage in conversation after the fact. So those are the I think the major pieces of how I've approached organizing the CTO Advisor virtual conference, and how I've approached making it different from an in-person conference, but also different from a webinar. A CTO Advisor virtual conference is not a webinar because there's a live element to it. And it's also not in person because you can't feel the energy from the room, but you can curate a digital experience that enables attendees to interact with one another, to have a shared experience. And then you can continue that shared experience even after the live program has been run and you still want to engage the audience. I love your feedback and suggestions. What have you seen that has worked? Not necessarily what hasn't worked, because we all know what hasn't worked. I've talked about what hasn't worked. I love to hear about what you've seen that's worked when it comes to virtual conferences and virtual events. Hit me up on Twitter at CTO Advisor. Register for the virtual conference CTO, A as in Apple, V as in Victor, C as in Charlie, CTO Advisor virtual conference.com. Talk to you next CTO Dose video.